Here we go. Welcome, everyone. Simon Rosenberg, Hopium Chronicles. Still love this crazy live technology from Substack. Joining me today for what's going to be a spirited conversation, because it always is when we're together, Stuart Stevens from Lincoln Square. Stuart, welcome.
Thank you, Simon.
You've always hosted me. It's great to host you today to get back. Hopefully we can do this on a regular.
The catering was superb.
And it's well, listen, thank you though for being here. And listen, I know we're having people dialing in and people are getting settled, but I wanted to get going. It's ended up becoming like every day that we think we're going to have a calm news day in the Trump era, we are disappointed. But there's a lot going on now, and I wanted you to come on and sort of just share and reflect where you think we are. I mean, in the last few days, right, we've had the Democrats kind of find a higher gear on the redistricting fight. You can see the kind of fight and commitment we've seen, something we all have wanted, right? We've seen the tariffs be implemented. Now we've had this Russia meeting coming up in Alaska on Friday, where Trump is allowing Putin to come into the United States. And then today in D.C., I live in D.C. I'm coming to you live from D.C. We've had this federalization of the district, the invocation of, or the revocation of some of the home rule statutes, which is a little bit shocking that this is actually happening. Where are we in Trump 2.0 right now?
Yeah, I think this is a fascinating moment that might be looked back on by historians, which we say a lot. But, for all the years I worked in the party, and before I did, there were kind of at least two principles here. One, that we were strong on Russia, don't negotiate, Soviet Union, don't negotiate with terrorists. And the other was family values. So what do we have now? We have, in this week, the Republican Party defending an obvious looming pardon with the most notorious child sex trafficker of our time, who was moved to a club fed by the president's personal criminal defense lawyer, which, just think about it. The idea that the president has a personal defense. It's like, we had Don Corleone had a lawyer. You had a lawyer. You had Walter White had a lawyer. And now Donald Trump has a lawyer who has flown down to Florida to cut some sweetheart deal with this. It's just, you listen to these survivors and they say, she was worse than Epstein. And there's upwards of 1,000 child rapes we're talking about here. So you take that, and then you take an international war criminal is coming to America, and we're welcoming him. Those two, it just sort of completely shows the total hollowness of anything that the Republican Party believed. And, you have people like, my old friend, client, Roger Wicker from Mississippi, who chairman of the Armed Services Committee, a position he's wanted to be for his entire life. And he has said on the record that Putin should be arrested. And now Putin's coming to Alaska. And if anybody is taking the over and under over whether or not Senator Wicker or any other Republican will call out Donald Trump by name, I'll take the under on that because I just don't think it's going to happen. And it just shows the fact that the Republican Party really doesn't exist as a normal governing American party now. It's an extremist movement that's led by one person. And I don't see that changing. I think the positive is, I think it is helping Democrats, helping those who are opposed to Trump. And I really think, it's another whole, I don't want to get into it, but I think this whole discussion about sort of the Democratic Party and all of this, I don't really think it's germane to the moment. The Democratic Party exists as a party that isn't Donald Trump and isn't an authoritarian movement. And that, to me, is a definition. And I wish Democrats would just wake up every morning with one message, which is, kick the shit out of Trump.
Yeah, and that we are, proud patriots who are getting up. I think this sort of grounding ourselves in patriotism democracy, free markets. I mean, all these kind of quaint things that are now, or home rule in DC, right? These kind of quaint notions that, a couple of years ago didn't seem terribly controversial or even antiquated, right? And we are, I think there's a lot of history happening right now, and I think I was very struck by that. Last week you could argue that 80 years of a global economic system that made America the most prosperous country in the history of the world and created unprecedented levels of opportunity and prosperity for the people of the world, it sort of ended last Friday with the tariffs that were implemented. We now see, we could be facing on Friday another kind of deep blow to the global system that had been put into place by the way, originally by the Democratic Party, coming out of World War II, that global system that again has made America peaceful and prosperous in unprecedented ways over the last 80 years seems to be under savage attack now by Trump. And I will be honest with you, Stuart, I've been a little surprised that this hasn't been a little bit more of something worth discussing, because it's the combination of the two pieces, right? It's the unraveling of the economic order that began last week with these Smoot-Hawley level tariffs. And then Trump, clearly signaling that he's going to demand that the Ukrainians give away territory, which in essence puts the United States on Putin's side in a war with Europe. And where all of a sudden it's not really clear. I mean, it could be that as of this coming Friday, we in essence are in a position with Russia against our longtime European allies.
Yeah, I mean, it's as if it's, 1779 and the French are holding peace talks with the Brits over how to deal with the American colony. I mean, you would think that maybe like America should be part of that. Look, I think that we overcomplicate this in some ways. The Russians wanted to elect Donald Trump. We know that. There's no question about that. And we know that Donald Trump won. So this is all kind of just playing out that the Russians got a president of the United States who they helped elect and who they clearly have a bond with that he doesn't have with any Democratic leader. Trump is an authoritarian, and he ran this tiny little company that way, mostly family members. I mean, never had more than 100 employees. And that's what he wants. I mean, look when he looks at North Korea.
With admiration, right?
With admiration. And I think there's an element, a cultural element to it, that a lot of Republicans, a lot of MAGA, and there really is no distinction now, they look at Russia and they go, okay, look, it's all run by white men. There's no women involved in any positions of power. There aren't any gays in Russia, just ask Putin. They have elections that are performative but not determinative. They all call themselves Christians. So what's the problem here? Yeah. I mean, tell me this isn't what Ron DeSantis wants in Florida. And the ability to rewrite history where facts don't matter. If you just say something, it becomes true. They want that. This is the country they want to live in. And are trying to curate.
With incredible ferocity, by the way. I mean, I think that's one of the things that has been remarkable about Trump in these first, for all the kind of images of him or sort of memes of him being lazy and golfing, the intensity of this administration and the grinding of the wheel, and every day him needing to be this sort of narcissistic need he has to be the center of attention, right? And to have everything in the world, literally, the tariffs put him at the center of the economic activity of every single person in the world, right? And affecting their economic lives. And today, and Anne Applebaum, when I interviewed her a few weeks ago, called it the spectacle of power, that he so needs these spectacles, right? The Putin coming to the U.S. And today in D.C., we had this kind of dramatic announcement that is now the second city that he will have targeted to assert himself, what was the line I used the other day, to force himself upon the city as he has forced himself upon other things in his life, right? This is the second city. I just wondered your thoughts about the initial read of what you've seen and been reported, Stuart, about what happened today.
Yeah, listen, I think that it's just another lesson that Democrats can't look at themselves as a alternative governing party. They really have to look at themselves as an opposition movement and look at all the levers of power that Democrats can use. I mean, let's start making DC a state. Let's start making Puerto Rico a state. As soon as they get into power, I would cut off all funding for the executive branch. I would nationalize Starlink. I would nationalize SpaceX. They need to start doing these big, bold statements and not just playing with it along the edges. Like we're going to come in and we're going to have less ICE agents. They need to try to pass federal laws that you can't be masked unless under extraordinary circumstances. And I think that's what Democrats want. I mean, you would know far better than I. But people are going to follow passion. And you have to acknowledge that we're in an extraordinary moment. And we can't be in this sort of World War I moment of like gentlemen don't read other gentlemen's mail. One of the little ironies is that the guy who was in charge of intelligence service in World War I, that was a famous, Henry Stimson, that was a famous statement of his, gentlemen don't read other. And later, when he was Secretary of War, it was then called, he was picked the targets of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So it's sort of an evolution. So I think we need to get to the Hiroshima and Nagasaki element here a lot faster than the other. And look, who knows? I mean, Trump clearly is going to try to give Ukraine to Russia, and he's going to fail because you could take away every weapon systems the United States is giving them. Ukrainians will fight to the last person. And I think it is a new world order. And there is, an opportunity for Democrats here, to me, to become the party of strength in that classic foreign policy sense, which they used to be. I mean, if you go back to the Nixon-Kennedy debates, Kennedy was to the right of Nixon. I mean, Nixon accused him of having a secret plan to invade Cuba. Turns out he was right. And Nixon's the one, Kennedy's one said there's a missile gap. He really ran to the right of Nixon on foreign policy. And I think we're really at that moment. It is a true statement that Bernie Sanders is to the right of the Republican Party on foreign policy. I mean, it was Nancy Pelosi who went to Taiwan. And I hope they can embrace that and define themselves, because if that can become a new element of the definition of the Democratic Party, I think it's a generational turn. And, one of the things we tried doing the Lincoln Project, and I thought the Harris campaign had moments where they did this very successfully, is use the iconography of patriotism, the big sweeping things. You go back to her acceptance speech, which I thought she did beautifully. And just while on the Harris campaign, I just got to say, you lose elections, that happens. But the idea you lose an election and you go into identity crisis seems to be a very strange reaction.
Well, and let me reflect on a few things you just said, and because I am trying to make sense of all this, and I think the last week to 10 days in Hopium, I've been writing a lot and having a lot of events and been very trying to grapple. And I think that, so two things. I think one is that I do think that Democrats are in the process of both finding a higher gear and understanding that they must keep going, right? That what is happening in Texas and the redistricting is only will matter if we continue to elevate our game on these things that are far more consequential, like the things we've been talking about today. And I do think that something has changed internally in kind of the Democratic national thing, where courage and bravery and ambition and willingness to fight, patriotism, is all of a sudden kind of understood as the only path forward for us. And where I think this notion that there was sort of, as I wrote in a piece last week, the illusion of a middle ground is evaporated in the last few weeks, and that we're either for democracy or we're for authoritarianism, and this notion that there's some other place we can wander into to sort of, is really not available to us any longer. And I think that to your point about Stimson, I think that you're seeing, Democrats starting to sort of, realize that this is it. Like, this is what's in front of us. It's not this other thing that we hoped we'd have. And Trump is continuing every day to push further and further and descend further and further, I think, both into madness and into authoritarianism. I think it's connected. I think authoritarianism is a form of madness, and that Trump is going, I think today, my big takeaway is that he looked like shit today. And he also sounded more crazy than he has sounded. And there's this, I think he is in profound, both political with the public and physical cognitive decline, that all these things are all happening. And that because of this and his inability to get out of the Epstein thing, to do anything that pushes his poll numbers up, that he's sort of going into deeper and darker and more extreme places, because people must bend the knee. And if they're not voluntarily bending the knee, he's going to bend it for them, right? In whatever perverse, dark ways that he has in his mind. And they invented new dark ways. I mean, the fact that he had a press conference today about crime in DC, which of course has been declining, and all the indicators, DC is not even in the top 25 cities in America in violent crime or in murder rates. He had the Secretary of Defense standing next to him for that press conference, right? And so go ahead, Stuart.
This is all about race. It's always been about race. What was the whole non-certification? Where were the areas that all these votes were stolen? Detroit, Chicago, Atlanta, Philadelphia. What do they have in common? They have a lot of black people. And what does DC have? DC has a lot of black people. So, the rural crime rate in most states in America is a lot higher than it is in DC. And like addictions, drug problems, all of that. But let me tell you, I mean, Donald Trump wants to take responsibility for DC, and let's judge him by how DC's going. Good luck with that, because it is a very difficult place to run because you have these limitations. And it's given you a perfect opportunity to talk about making DC a state. But
yeah.
Let's get it done. I think this illusion of a middle ground is just such an important point. I go back to the guy in the Camp Auschwitz sweatshirt. How do you meet that guy halfway? And he was pardoned by Trump.
Yeah.
And I think that it is morally reprehensible to try to meet them halfway. I think the Democratic Party needs to be more judgmental. I think it needs to operate on this core conviction: we're right, they're wrong. Because you are right, and they are wrong. And that there are more of us than there are of them. And there are more of us than there are of them. And I think, if you, as someone who goes around giving out Anne Applebaum's Twilight of Democracy like watchtowers to random strangers in airports, I mean, one of the points she makes is that all of these students of autocracy do is that one of the key elements is for autocrats to try to make you feel that it's hopeless.
Right.
And that you have what's happening here is inevitable. It's obviously not. I personally think that the 24 elections are going to be the high water mark of MAGA. I think it's going to be the Pickett's charge of MAGA. You had an election. I just don't think we talk about this enough, that the right track in the country was 27%. No incumbent parties ever lost when it was below 45. You had a job approval of the president at 40. No incumbent party's ever gotten 2 points higher. She got like 48. So it was a perfect environment for an incumbent to lose, and an incumbent party lost. Okay, that happens. But they lost with a perfectly responsible, someone who's qualified to be president, who would be a good president. And there's no shame in that. And I just don't understand how the Republican Party now is run by this lunatic of declining capabilities, appointing these thugs, Russian stooges, weirdos, dangerous people across the government. And we're discussing what's wrong with the Democratic Party. How did this happen? I mean, it's like, you finally arrest a Unabomber and you're critiquing what he's wearing. It's like, no, I don't think that's the point. It's not about the hoodie.
We're very good at doing MAGA's work for them sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, how did the media buy into this? And part of it is, I think, that the Democratic Party doesn't assert enough. And I think assertion versus questioning is a really key element in politics. It's consider it a good thing or a bad thing, but I think it's a true thing that strong and wrong will always beat weak and right.
We've been having this conversation. You and I have been having this conversation, and we've been having it a lot inside of Hopium. And I wrote a lot about this in the last few weeks about how, we have to, the reason why what happened around Texas was so important for Democrats is that they were fighting, and they looked strong and had conviction, and they believed in something, and they were executing on it. And there is a point in our system, as we've described. I mean, not only is the middle ground an illusion, but there is a point in our politics where compromise becomes appeasement. And that, part of my sort of big takeaway about the election was that, and I've been in significant dialogue with friends in the family about all this, is that, when we do our testing, Stuart, when we poll and we do focus groups and we do ad testing, we don't really spend a lot of time historically as Democrats on the issues around strong and weak, strong leader, weak leader, as we call it in the business, right? And it is sort of on the periphery of the things that we understand. And part of what I've been trying to do over the last few months is inside my family, in the old Democratic family that I grew up with, is to get us to sort of acknowledge that we're not listening properly, that in terms of the things that go into how people make up their mind about politics or a leader, we're overly amped on issues and inadequately amped on these other kind of intangible attributes of leadership. And one of the things that I showed in a post the other day, and I'll send it to you, was that in the exit polls on the question of, there was a question of strong leader, weak leader, and Trump won that 2-1. Kamala won all the attributes around understanding my problems and having the right intentions, right? Which is, I think that we get a lot of credit for people think we're well-intentioned, that we mean well, but that we don't have the power and strength to see things through. And that where Trump crushed Kamala was on the question, it was a version of the question, is the strength to sort of execute on their agenda and make things happen for us. He won that by 50 points, right? And I think that for me, one of the sort of absolute non-negotiables for us as we go forward as a movement is, to your point, not only do we have to have the right aspirations, but we have to demonstrate that we are tough enough to see the agenda through and make it happen in the real world. Because being well-intentioned in life doesn't get you the presidency. And I think that this may sound to outsiders like, no duh, Simon, right? Like, of course, but we developed a political culture of listening and focus groups and polling that was heavily about issues and not about all these that space that Trump lives in, right? Strong and weak, winning and losing, successful failure, right? And we've got to develop an entirely new understanding, I think, of what voters are really looking for, which is we win on the good guys, people like we know your heart's in the right place. Now we got to win that they believe that we have the toughness to deliver for them and the strength to deliver for them. And so I agree with your fundamental point that this has been a place that as we go through that evolution that you described, right? From gentlemen don't read each other's letters to what came later, this issue of us being strong and people believing that we can actually get the shit done that we say we're going to go do becomes very, very important now in our own evolution as a movement, I think, in the coming months.
You know, Simon, I worked for Bush 2000, 2004. And, I can remember vividly sitting there, January or so in 2004, and we're trying to craft out a campaign plan. And it was clear there was just one message, and that was what Bush ended up basically delivering. There's a lot of bad people out there who want to kill us. We ought to kill them first. And if you look at the campaign, he said that everywhere he went, and in some variation of it. And Kerry was trying to sort of ride news waves. I mean, remember at one point in 2004, he was talking about the flu vaccine.
Right.
And people were holding up syringes or something. I mean, and, I can remember Carl and everything, the president was asking, like, is this going to work? And the answer in a more elegant version of this was basically, we don't know, but it's the only thing that will work. And I think that conviction is part of strength. And I think that you need to label people more. I mean, I would hold the belief, and I would assert, you cannot be a patriot and vote for Pete Hegseth to run the military. You can't. You can call yourself a patriot. You just can't do that, because it is helping our enemies and hurting America. And that's sort of the definition of not being a patriot. I don't think that you can be a decent person and not call at what the outrage it is of cutting deals with one of the most notorious child sex traffickers of modern history and giving her cut to it. You can't. It means you don't believe in this stuff.
Right.
And I think that, Democrats need to be more judgmental about this stuff. And call it out for what it is. And I think that,
the plain talk. It's plain talk. It's what it is, Stuart. And I think this is the key thing that you were describing about Bush, right? Is that, we are so dependent upon now for the polling and focus grouping and ad testing, which is, to me, becomes sort of this new kind of abomination in our data flow in our family, sort of the over-reliance on it.
Madness.
Because it removes us from the way that people actually really consume information these days, right? And it's sort of too rarefied a setting, too much of a controlled setting, right? For the way that information flows. Is that I just want to say that one of the things we've been discussing a lot inside of Hopium is this idea that we do need one of the things we're missing in this evolution is a clear story about them and about us, right? And, because you pointed out, you guys had a clear, simple kind of story you were telling to people, and that then the campaign could then build a campaign around that. And that we're going to need, and I think there's an enormous need now for us to talk about what they're doing to the public in very direct, honest ways about our descent into authoritarianism, the ending of the global order that has made us wealthy and prosperous and powerful, and all the things that Trump is doing, the way that he's hurting the country. And then, our commitment to be the proud patriots that are going to fight it every step of the way, and then to fight it, right? I mean, to your point is that we are lacking this kind of organizing principle, this sense of clarity about the moment and who we are. I think we got closer to it in the last couple of weeks. I think there is this kind of evolution beginning as the way you described it. But man, we got along.
Democrats should pass a resolution that Putin should be arrested.
Right.
They should. I mean, they should just straight up resolved that a war criminal coming within the bounds of the United States should be arrested. That's a pretty uncontroversial statement. I mean, we're rounding up American citizens who haven't even been charged with the crime and sending them to a concentration camp. It seems like we could take one of the mass murderers of our times, like we have Pol Pot coming here, and we're going to try to, sort of work out this thing. They should do that. They should pass that resolution. And on Friday, wherever Zelensky is It's where the Democrats should be. They should get on a plane. They should go to Ukraine if that's where Zelensky is. And they should surround him. They should show, this is our guy. This is what we believe. And be unequivocal about it. Putin is a mass murderer. If you think, I mean, I'm old enough. My dad fought in World War II, 3 years in the South Pacific. My uncle was machine gunned in France, never really recovered. You take all of the dead that are buried in Europe from World War II, and then they came back to life. Which side do you think they'd fight on? For Putin or for Ukraine? And that's what they've betrayed, is this legacy of the greatest generation. And we need to be saying that. You're going to say to somebody like John Thune, you're not a patriot. This is anti-American. You're betraying those who went before you in South Dakota. And believe it. And I think they do believe it. They just are hesitant to, I think they're worried about, was this going to alienate people who voted for Trump or something? And I just don't think you can work this. And look, I just say one thing on this ad testing. It is madness. First of all, the way ad testing is done in politics is not the way that it's not the way Apple tests their ads. And there is actually some ways you can test ads, but it's a very complicated process, very expensive. You could never do it at the speed we have to do. And one of my first memories of working a presidential campaign, so I did a little work in '88 in media. I made a film for the convention, some other stuff. Going into Bush headquarters, and there was a section that was the media section, like there is in a lot of campaigns. And there was this giant gun safe there. And I was like, what the fuck's a gun safe doing here? And it was where, at the end of every day, they would put all the tapes, and we still had tapes then, of the commercials that Ailes insisted on it, so that Bob Teeter, who was the pollster, couldn't take them and test them. And Ailes got a fucking gun safe. He's like, I can remember vividly this conversation between Ailes and Teeter and Baker. And, Ailes would say, do you think Willie Horton's going to test well? Really? You really think so? Because it's going to test like shit, but it's going to work. And, if you could test your way to success, everybody would do it. I mean, it's sort of axiomatic.
Well, and I think, Stuart, the thing I've often said, we'll wrap up here, is that even the term messaging to me is a symptom of the problem that you're describing, which is that messages are ephemeral. They feel contrived, right? And that, and messaging, as comes at the end of the process. It is not the process, right? It's the last mile of having a strategy and an agenda and a big argument and a narrative and a story, right, that you're trying to tell over time. And the whole way that we talk about messaging, as somebody who grew up on the media side of the business, I was a producer for ABC News and writer for ABC News, a young guy, and was always on the comm side of our business. The way that Democrats today talk about messaging, to me, is a symptom of us being sort of cut off from the real way that people communicate to one another, right? Which is part of what I was getting at earlier, which is through passion and commitment and fight and grit and narrative and story, right? You have a narrative. I was an English major in college, right? A narrative helps all the words and the letters all add up to mean something when you read them, right? And we are, by pulling things out of that process, by isolating them out of an agenda or a story or narrative, you're making it weaker, because it gets stronger when it's in. As you pointed out, we had one thing we were saying in 2004, and everything built from that. And I think that we've almost reversed the process in some ways, in the way that we think about how this stuff is all done. And so I appreciate, the reason I love talking to you is that I do think that one of the things about us finding this higher gear and this evolution is us going back and telling simple and plain stories about who we are and who they are and about the future of the country, that are kind of things that you would say in private to your family, right? Like, we have to be having these conversations with the public, and everyone who's telling us to to cut the edges or to isolate out. They're misleading us at this point in this time in history. And so it's one of the reasons I've always enjoyed being with you, is because I think the way that you describe politics is this kind of muscular, forceful way that politicians must communicate if they're going to be able to move people to get behind them.
And this, I have this sense of like the Democratic Party. There's been 250 focus groups about how to talk to young men. I mean, what's next? We're going to do like an in-depth study, like why men go to strip clubs. I mean, I think we know. I mean, we don't have to really test this yet. And, just as a campaign budget is nothing but a plan put to numbers, messaging is nothing but an articulation of beliefs. And you have to start with the beliefs. And an inarticulate but passionate expression of something that you truly believe is always far more powerful. I mean, look, I go back to Bush again. Bush really in 2000 cared about education. It was something that he believed in. He had been focused on it as governor. And whenever we were sitting around in one of these campaign meetings, like, what are we going to do? Where are you going to go? The default was always going to go to school, because he would light up. He would be very good. And he believed it. If you send him to a hospital to talk about healthcare, he'd be like, well, people shouldn't get sick. I don't know. That's just bad. It didn't work. And that's what you have to find, what it is that people believe in. And that's why this strange bifurcation and discussion that, well, should it be about the economy or should it be about democracy, to me just seems to be a false choice. Because as you were saying at the very beginning, it is democracy that has made us the wealthiest country in the world. It is democracy that has made Europe successful. And if Europe were not successful, we would not be the wealthiest country in the world. End of stop. And I think you can't separate these two. The Marshall Plan was a plan of powerful self-interest by the United States. It had the benefit of helping people, but it was conceived in our own good. And it worked, it worked for a long time.
Well, and Stuart, let me end with this, because this is something that you know well, because you've evoked it today, is that, this global liberal order that we all imagined and built together over the last 80 years has, not only in the intelligence community's report about the 2016 election was their very first sentence that what Putin was doing was an extension of his long-standing effort to try to weaken the American-led global order, because he understood how much the power of the West had ended the Soviet Union, prevailed in the Cold War, and how it was our system, right? It was this global system that we built that we derived our power and our prosperity from. And I just want to close by reminding everybody that this global system that is under extraordinary assault right now, this week, produced, in terms of human history, in recent years, more people have lived under democracies than any time in human history. We had the lowest extreme poverty rate any time in human history, even with exploding populations. We had extraordinary levels of literacy that had been unachieved, had never been achieved before in all of human history. And life expectancy went from 45 years all the way up into the 70s for the people of the world. We have been living in a golden age in human history. There's never been a better time to be alive in human history than there's been, because of Pax Americana and because of this global system that we imagined and built together. And that system that has created this golden age for human history is the thing that Trump and Putin are trying to tear down now. And so the stakes of this fight are not just the stakes for us in our own domestic politics, but it's for the future of the futures of the kids and the grandkids of the whole world, not just here. And it's why all of us need to keep fighting. It's why all of us need to keep working with the Lincoln Square and the amazing work that Stuart and his whole team do. And you guys are this fast-growing Substack monster now. In recent weeks, it's been really cool to see. But man, we have to all stick together here and work as hard as we can, because the stakes in what's happening in front of us, as we saw in DC today, are enormous. And Stuart, I often say, and I interviewed Michael Steele the other day,
I love Michael.
that in this journey that I've been on and we've all been on, I always want to close with a simple thing by saying thank you. Thank you for your courage, for your patriotism. I think that if I had to do what you did, which is to leave a party and to understand, and to be now working against that same party, regardless of how much it had changed, it takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of patriotism. It takes a lot of gumption. And I just want to say, as a fellow proud patriot, thank you for what you've done. And, look forward to us continuing to escalate, elevate, grow together and get this thing done the way we need to.
But remember, your party had the chance to nominate George Wallace. It didn't. My party had the chance to nominate George Wallace, and we did. So that makes it a lot easier. But thank you, brother. All right.
Keep fighting, everybody. Thanks so much. And if you like this, please, like it, share it with others, subscribe to Lincoln Square and to Hopium, and let's keep fighting, everyone. Thanks for being here today.